Hello, hello! Welcome back to Lady Romance. Today we are on Chapter 17 of Queen Andraya. Thank you for coming back to listen to more. Here we go. Chapter 17, The Panther and the Lion. "What is this?" a voice growled at the door. Andraya's eyes bulged when she recognized Dolion's voice. Of all the times he could have walked in, this had to be the worst. "Please distract him for a moment," Andraya whispered. Steffan nodded once in understanding. "Chancellor, you finally made it." He stepped aside, and Andraya walked over to her bookshelves next to the grandfather clock and pretended to be looking for a volume as she discreetly wiped her eyes dry. "Yes," said Dolion. "And unfortunately, you are the first face I run into. What are you doing here?" "To be a thorn in your side as much as possible," the prince said wryly. "Is this your first accomplishment?" Dolion sneered. "Well, it certainly is the most enjoyable one," said the prince. Dolion scoffed. "Your Majesty, has the prince told you of his outlandish accusations against me? He was in such a rage once he found out you were poisoned. He accused half the royal court of being murderers." He laughed out loud. Andraya dropped the book in her hand, and it slammed on the floor with a loud thud. She spun around in sudden fury. "Is this a laughing matter to you, Chancellor?" Dolion's sleek black suit fit his masculine frame perfectly, and his raven hair waved into a perfect glue. He laughed some more, but then he coughed. "Madam, I only meant to point out how ridiculous the Prince of Deldria is." "Ridiculous?" Andraya cried. "Is it ridiculous to find out who poisoned the queen?" Dolion cocked his head. "Your Majesty, how do you expect to discover it? It is a fool's errand." "Only the guilty would suggest such a thing," Steffan snapped. "Oh!" Dolion threw his arms up in the air. "And the allegations just keep coming." "Sir, have you nothing better to do? What motivation would I have for poisoning Her Majesty?" He opened a hand toward Andraya. "My queen, you know I adore you." Andraya folded her arms across her chest. But before she could begin her rebuttal, Steffan was already refuting. "How dare you say that? Not after your shocking disrespect toward her." "I," Dolion said, putting a hand on his chest. "Your Majesty, when have I ever disrespected you?" Andraya could not help but laugh. "When have you not, Chancellor?" Dolion's eyes could not get any bigger. He opened his arms wide. "Give me an example." "Oh, let's see," Andraya said, tapping a finger on her chin as if she were contemplating. "Perhaps the time when you tried to manipulate me into having you take over my head crown?" Dolion stepped toward her in earnest. "I was trying to help you. I did not want you to be over your head with responsibility." "So you decided to hold a secret meeting to have me voted out?" Andraya cried. "Yes!" Dolion exclaimed. "You were not being reasonable enough to give it up on your own. I was doing you a favor. The head crown is a gentleman's work. It is no match for the likes of you." He looked her over as if her appearance would confirm his opinion. Andraya's heart raced with anger. She opened her mouth to retort, but again Steffan beat her to it. "She has twice your mind, you disgraceful mutt." Steffan's voice was low and hard. His entire frame grew rigid. Andraya had never seen his face look so fierce. His blue eyes shone bright with anger, which made him look even more terrifying, and all the more handsome for it. Dolion smirked. Spoken like a true Deldrian. But now you're acting like a man. What happened?" He sneered. Steffan stalked right up to him and stopped just an inch in front of his face. The two men, equal in height, stood nose to nose and red with rage. They looked like a panther and a lion, fully clad in satin suits, ready to attack at the first sign of offense. Andraya walked toward them and placed a hand on both their shoulders. "Please do not do this." Neither one backed down. Andraya squeezed Steffan's arm just a bit, to which his jaw relaxed and he took a step back. Only then did Dolion do the same. Andraya let out a slow breath and walked over and around her desk and sat in her golden-colored stuffed chair. "Gentlemen, let us put our differences aside at present and talk business." Steffan rolled his shoulders back and turned to face the queen. But Dolion still stayed at the ready, glaring at Steffan. "Chancellor, can you do that?" Andraya asked. Dolion circled his neck like he was trying to release the tension out of it. He also turned to face her. Andraya motioned to the large, empty, cushioned chairs in front of her desk. "Please sit, gentlemen." Steffan sat in the red velvet chair with remarkable feigning of indifference to the chancellor. Dolion, on the other hand, openly sneered at the prince as he took his seat next to him. "Chancellor, why is it that you have not allowed Mr. Besnik to see your shipment logs?" "Why is it that he needs to?" Dolion snapped. Andraya leaned back in her chair and drummed her finger on her desk as if she were deep in thought. "Let me see. Why would a head crown want to check on her chancellor? Perhaps because one of the ports has suspicious activity." Dolion folded his arms and leaned back as well. "Suspicious how, madam?" "Why does the Griffin port ship to the east?" Andraya asked. Dolion rolled his eyes. "You will have to ask the Marquis, madam. I am only in charge of cargo. Besnik tells me the Griffin port makes quite a profit, despite inefficient transporting," said Steffan. Dolion's face twisted back into a panther. "Why is the prince here?" he asked through his teeth. For one fleeting moment, Steffan's countenance shifted into a lion's again, but he quickly smoothed out his expression. Dolion bounced his gaze back and forth between the queen and the prince with scornful eyes. Neither of them seemed to want to tell him, but it turns out they did not have to, since Andraya spotted Hudson standing tall and massive by her office door. How had she not heard him slip in? "Your Highness, allow me to speak with the Chancellor in private. Hudson, you may stay," she said, for Steffan's benefit. Steffan's eyes swelled as he looked over his shoulder to verify the Queen's guard was indeed in the room. "As you wish, Your Majesty." He stood and bowed, then brushed past Dolion, who gave him an evil glare. Steffan's response was no less bitter. When the prince shut the door behind him, Dolion growled, "Finally! Please do not tell me that vile man is courting you." "That is an irrelevant request, Chancellor," said the Queen. Dolion rolled his eyes and placed an ankle on top of his knee. "But he is from Deldria. I do not think you know, madam, what infernal ideas he will put into your head." Andraya smirked. Intriguing, yet still not relevant. Dolion abruptly put his foot back to the ground and leaned forward in his chair, resting his elbows on his knees. "But it is relevant, madam. You still have not told me how you liked my red roses." His usual scowl smoothed out, and his face was as handsome as ever. Andraya laughed. "Chancellor, do you not remember the note that accompanied those roses?" Dolion opened his hands dismissively, as if his note was not offensive. Andraya laughed again. "And do you recall how you attempted to strip me of my title? You yelled in front of the entire Royal Council and Island Coalition that I was finished. You have not respected a single choice I have made since I was crowned. And now you want to know how I liked your roses. Do you not see a contradiction?" Dolion placed a hard finger on the desk in front of him and said, "The only contradiction is you. You are not respecting my actions to try to protect you from yourself." "You mean take over my head crown position?" Dolion opened his arms wide. "Yes, as we have established!" he exclaimed. "Do you not see how it will benefit you? I can save you from much embarrassment." Andraya's chest tightened, and she clenched her jaw shut. Dolion placed his elbows on his knees again and leaned forward. "What is that vexing look for? You know I adore you, do you not? I think you are gorgeous, the most gorgeous woman in the world," he said, throwing a hand in the air. Andraya's heart beat with fury. She spoke in a fierce whisper. "Chancellor, we will not have this discussion ever again." Dolion threw both his arms up now and slapped them down on his lap. "You know what? You were just poisoned. You are upset. I understand." "No, you do not understand!" Andraya yelled. Dolion stood and raised his hands in surrender. "Who did poison me?" Andraya asked with contempt. "How would I know?" he said through his teeth. "Because you want my head crown so badly," Andraya snapped. Dolion rolled his head. "Ugh, you are impossible. Now, my queen, I will not allow you to see the shipment logs. You do not need to venture in micromanaging my stewardship." "I could say the same for you," Andraya said with disdain. "It is entirely different, madam," Dolion shouted. Then somehow he managed a sloppy bow and said, "Good day," before jetting out of her office. Andraya leaned back in her chair with an enormous sigh. How could one man be so boorish? She breathed in and out with long, slow breaths to calm herself. "Shall I send for someone, Your Majesty?" Hudson's voice rasped so deep it startled her. Had she never heard Hudson speak before? "No, Hudson, I am fine, but thank you." "Then may I make a request?" he asked. The queen opened a hand in front of her. "Go ahead." "Next time he speaks to you like that, do I have your permission to crush his skull?" Andraya laughed despite herself. She leaned forward and rubbed a hand over her forehead. "If you tempt me with that too often, Hudson, I might just say yes." Hudson gave her a childish grin. "There are few things, Your Majesty, that I would enjoy more." And that concludes Chapter 17. I hope you come back next Thursday for Chapter 18, which is called Suspects. And as always, thank you for listening to Queen Andraya. Until next time, take care.